Hello and welcome to another exciting lecture for behavioral neuroscience. In this lecture, we're going to do part 2 of emotions. It's going to be a short lecture. I'm going to go through some things really quick. None of this will be on the next exam. This is a supplemental lecture. So when we're talking about emotions, we do have to look at what qualifies as emotion. There's primary emotions, which are going to be those emotions that basically are very biologically ingrained. And then there's secondary emotions, which are going to be the emotions that require consciousness, require us to have thoughts about the past and the future. Now, some different theorists include different things as emotions. When we look at this, you definitely have these primary emotions up top. There's some that aren't there, like happiness, but that does fall under humor. But those are going to be the primaries. Some of these are secondaries. So the primaries here, the secondaries here. Some others, though, include other things. Not necessarily everyone includes all of these. Sexual interest and sexual feelings and interest. Those are classified as emotions. Thirst, smelling, hunger. Some classify these as emotions, some don't. We're going to look at them in general as emotions. Why are we looking at these in general as emotions? Why are we still classifying these? Because of the definition we had of emotion, which is things that are basically adaptive drives, things that drive us adaptively. So you can look at things like thirst and hunger and say, okay, well, having thirst and hunger helps us drink and eat, which helps us survive. Sexual feelings help us have sexual interest, which helps us reproduce. So these have adaptive functions. I'm not going to go into too much on all of these. I just want to point out that even the theorists, some include these, some emotions, some include others. It's just one of those things that's interesting. One of the things, and we're going to rapid fire a few things here, one of them is how accurate are we at predicting future emotions? So I talked in the last set of slides about how emotions are hard, it's hard to deceive with emotions, but how accurate are we at predicting emotions? In actuality, while we are really good, tend to be really good at predicting what emotions we will feel given a situation, we tend to universally overestimate both how long we're going to feel that way and the intensity of those emotions. So let's say we're thinking about, and we're going to talk about anger in just a little bit. Let's say we're looking at I give you a scenario where someone insults you. And we tend to be pretty good at predicting that we'll be angry when we're insulted. However, we overestimate how long we think we will feel that emotion of anger and how angry we'll be at the insult. And this is actually true for both positive and negative events. So insult for negative, we overestimate how long we're going to be angry and how angry we'll be. Even things like winning the lottery. We overestimate how happy we'll be and how long we'll be happy. So we are good at predicting what emotion, but we overestimate the intensity and how long we will feel that emotion. So why do we have emotions? Well, one of the things, like I said, is because they're adaptive, but there's also Robin Dunbar's hypothesis of the social brain. And that is, when we are in social groups, we tend to have a greater need for emotions. We will have more emotions because it is more important to express to others the emotions we have. That's one of the things I talked about, how when you're alone, you show less emotion than when you're in groups. Well, just the fact that we are one of the most social species, we have culture, and because of that, we have society, and because of that, we have we just are basically a very social species. Like I said, if not the most social species, we have a greater need for emotions. This actually pans out in things like the size of the amygdala. In individuals, the greater number of people in their social network, the greater number of friends they have, the greater number of acquaintances they have, the greater number of people that they report as being part of their social network. When they look at amygdala size, interestingly enough, there is a positive correlation between them. So the larger your amygdala volume, the more people you tend to have in your social network, and the greater number of embedded networks that you have. So just again, interestingly enough here, that we tend to have a greater amygdala size with greater social group. This is a correlation. We can't say that a greater amygdala causes us to have a larger social group. Could be that having a larger social group causes us to have a larger amygdala, or it could be some third factor. The point still remains, though, that there is this correlation. Prefrontal cortex volume also predicts social network size. So there's a positive correlation between your prefrontal cortex volume and the number of people in your social network and the number of social networks you have. So just very interesting there. Those regions of our brain that are more related to emotions are larger the larger social networks we have. So it lends evidence towards this social brain hypothesis. That is, that we have more emotions because we have larger social networks, or again, we have larger social networks because we have more emotions. Next, let's talk about anger and aggression. One of my favorite topics because this is what I've done quite a bit of research on. First off, before we get into this at all, I have to point out aggression itself is a behavior, not an emotion. The primary emotion of aggression is anger. So anger is an emotion. Aggression is a behavior. So you have, basically, you have external, internal elicitors. You have an appraisal of what's going on. This is all what we talked about in the first set of emotion stuff. Then you have anger. So anger is the emotion you feel. Then from that emotion, you have the expression of anger. You'll have the bodily changes that occur due to the anger. But then you also have behavior, and that behavior is aggression. So I'm going to talk mainly about aggression, but just think back that aggression is a result of anger. So whenever I talk about aggression, I'm really talking indirectly about anger. Like on the next, we're going to talk about, well, what's one of the biggest things that causes aggression? And really what it is I'm talking about is the big things that cause anger. And that anger then results in aggression. So I talked about it in the first set of slides about testosterone, cortisol, and inhibition and all of that. We'll kind of get into that a little bit, but really what I want to get into here is more of what is causing the anger that's then causing the aggression. One of the two main types is what's referred to as reactive aggression. So reactive aggression, also called hot or hostile aggression, is an aggression that is very impulsive. It's behavior that's motivated to harm someone. So again, what is aggression? Aggression is the intentional causing of harm. Well, reactive aggression is basically a very impulsive with high levels of anger that lead to responsive or reactive aggression. This is a aggression that's a provoked aggression. I provoke you instantaneously, I insult you, and your instant reaction is your reactive aggression. One thing we know here is that the sexes do not differ in frequency or intensity of anger, but the form of aggression does tend to differ, whether it's indirect or direct, tend and befriend, that type of thing, or whether it becomes outright hostility does differ. Though males tend to be more outright aggressive rather than the more of the indirect aggressive. So this interpersonal violence doesn't show sex differences, but men are more likely to inflict serious wounds. So when it does come to actual physical aggression, you do have women tending to be potentially being just as violent or just having just as high levels of violence. However, when we do look at the violence and aggression that does occur, it tends to be more serious or to a greater degree when in men. So that's reactive aggression, and that is going to be that direct result of anger. Proactive aggression, on the other hand, also called instrumental aggression, doesn't come directly from anger. It does come indirectly from anger, but it doesn't come directly from anger. So it is anger in the past that led to a premeditated, calculated instance of harmful behavior. It's meant to get a practical or material end. So people will use proactive aggression if they're trying to gain something and they don't have a concern about the person that they're willing to harm. So a proactive aggression is a behavior that comes from something other than direct anger. And even then, like I said, it comes from indirect anger. Sometimes it doesn't even come from indirect anger. Sometimes it just comes from this cold, premeditated desire to gain something at the expense of others. So on the previous slide where I talked about anger is basically the impetus of aggression, not always. Anger is the impetus of reactive aggression. Proactive aggression, which is a different type of aggression entirely, is more cold. It's more calculated. It's not coming directly from anger. Like I said, it can come indirectly from anger. Something happened to you in the past, you've cooled off, but that anger then leads to a building up of a desire for revenge. However, some people who don't feel emotions at all, such as those with psychopathy, will engage in proactive aggression to get this material end, to gain something. It's almost as if we should break aggression down into two different things that aren't really related. So when we talk about reactive aggression and proactive aggression, they are very different types of aggression. This reactive aggression is led by basically hormones, a reduction in inhibition, a reduction in or an increase in risk-taking behavior. All of that can lead to reactive aggression. Proactive aggression is more of a long-term planning. So looking at anger as an emotion. It's universal. It has a fairly specific expression, physiological profile, and neural mediation. Basically, it's the same across cultures. It doesn't typically rise internally. Anger comes from something external. And we're going to talk in 2 slides about the frustration-aggression hypothesis. And essentially, most anger arises from frustration. And again, like all emotions, anger has an adaptive value. So when we're looking at this, we've got this trigger, these external triggers. It's going to be like catching a wife cheating in bed, being disrespected if status is important, frustration due to being impeded from goals. Then you get modulators. These are the things like your hormones in your body. So levels of testosterone and cortisol, we talked about that in the previous emotions chapter. Alcohol. So alcohol lowers inhibitions, increases the chances of being aggressive. Other environmental factors like how you were raised. And all of this comes together to result in aggression or not. So then you get the aggressive behaviors that result from that. Let's look at that frustration aggression hypothesis that I was talking about. So the frustration aggression hypothesis is basically a hypothesis that says that the occurrence of aggression behavior, anger, that comes from anger, always is in the existence of frustration. And this, when we're talking about aggression here, we're talking about reactive aggression. We're not talking about proactive aggression. Again, some don't even count proactive aggression as the same category. Or as the same thing. So we're looking at reactive aggression, and it comes from the frustration aggression hypothesis that says that the existence of frustration leads to anger, which leads to aggression. And frustration is going to be at the blockage or interference with any personal goal. In infants, this personal goal could be being fed, so they're hungry. So their frustration at being hungry turns into anger. Or let's say their desire is to be not in pain or clean. It would be more not in pain because a dirty diaper causes irritation and pain. So their frustration is that they've got a dirty diaper that causes anger, which causes them to cry. So a frustration is going to be the blockage or interference with personal goals. Science has since later recognized that anger is more precisely what's elicited by the intentional thwarting and not by just accidental or unintentional frustration. So if it's something that's a accidental or unintentional blockage or interference with a personal goal, it doesn't tend to lead to anger, and if it does lead to anger, it leads to a much smaller level of anger and doesn't tend to then lead to aggression. So this gets us to relating to that is mistreatment. Mistreatment is going to be the deliberate mistreatment, at least the perception or appraisal that there's deliberate mistreatment going on, that you've been mistreated, insulted, that type of thing. And this tends to elicit anger, and this is why the amygdala then shows heightened activation to an opponent behaving selfishly. Again, selfishly is going to be mistreatment. Greater activation then predicts greater likelihood of punishing that selfish player. In animals, interestingly enough, they violently will attack violators of social rules. So let's say it's a social rule. You've got a species where you've got dominant and subordinate individuals in a tribe, a pack, a society, a herd, whatever it is. Let's say you've got a pack of wolves, and the dominant animal is showing their dominance to a subordinate wolf, and that subordinate wolf shows submissiveness. They roll on their back, they show submissiveness. If the dominant animal then continues to attack after the submission, the submissive male will attack back. Rather than remaining submissive, will then attack back. Giraffes, they fight, males will fight. If a male giraffe kicks a rival male in the same way that they would kick a attacking lion, the rival giraffe will then fight back rather than become submissive, because it's basically a social rule that has been violated. That type of thing. And it's not even just submission. If the males are fighting for dominance, one kicks in an incorrect way, in a way that's not socially acceptable in those situations. There's these unwritten rules. a giraffe kicks in a wrong way, the other giraffe will then fight back harder and will also break rules when the one has broken rules. So these rage reactions serve to dissuade mistreatment. The norms are then enforced by fear of retaliatory attacks that go above and beyond, even if you feel you can win the retaliatory attack. Let's say that giraffe now, the other one is fighting back, kicking in ways that they don't normally kick. The original one may still win. However, he's likely to be injured, and becoming injured means he's less likely to survive. So it's that risk that is taken there. So retaliatory attacks are actually, there should be fear of them, even if you feel that you can fight back. In humans, we've got this with things like fighting fair. We've got levels of fighting fair. There's rules against sucker punching, and someone who sucker punches is likely to get retaliated against. So that retaliation is one of the things that keeps back from people sucker punching, stuff like that. Next thing we'll talk about is catharsis. So catharsis was the psychoanalytic idea that anger can be discharged via doing things like violence or watching violent TV, hitting a punching bag, via sport. This is 100% incorrect. The research actually shows that the opposite occurs. Engagement in sports tends to increase aggression when angered. Anger depicted in movies is more likely to be intimidated. So in this case, the watching aggression, watching boxing matches is one of the early studies they did. People were actually more likely to be aggressive afterwards. Watching sporting events, engaging in sport, or even watching sport increases aggressive tendencies. So it's just a pretty human universal that engaging in things like this does not release or reduce anger. It actually tends to increase aggression. And when you think about it, anger and aggression come from heightened arousal. The heightened arousal of the parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system, all of that, well, the sympathetic, not the parasympathetic, but heightened arousal of that, and engaging in sport or watching this just ends up engaging this or increasing activation of the sympathetic nervous system. So in that sense, it actually increases or basically prolongs anger. So bodily arousal maintains aggressive motivation. Rather than catharsis, the clues that we have to the function of aggression basically come to what reduces aggression. What types of things, what the transgressor aggression hypothesis, that is, what reduces anger. Things like reducing blood pressure. So it's been found that anger raises your blood pressure. Anything that reduces your blood pressure, anything that calms you, meditation, drugs that reduce it, all of those, anything that reduces blood pressure is going to be something that potentially reduces anger. And blood pressure can drop in other ways. If the subject of if the person who engaged in the act, the transgressor, was subject to the participant's return of aggression, it reduced blood pressure. If a third party punished them, if there was a severe or convincing apology on or the third party did something on the transgressor's behalf to basically apologize, that type of thing, those are the different types of things that can reduce anger. And interestingly enough, and I'm not going to talk about this here, is that anger actually causes long-term anger causes long-term health issues. And the one thing that's been shown to reduce those long-term health issues and reverse them is a reduction in anger. So if you're a hot-blooded person, you're angry all the time, well, that has long-term health issues, and I really suggest finding a way to reduce that anger, even if it's therapy or whatever. So again, the sympathetic division of the autonomic nervous system is active, fight or flight. The adrenal cortex releases cortisol, adrenaline, prepares the individual for combat or possible wounding. And this differs from activation shown in fear, in that, interestingly enough, in fear, when you have fear, more blood flows to the legs. When you have anger, more blood flows to the fists. And this comes back to the fact that throughout human evolution, even though we've got weapons now, most of human evolutionary history, we didn't have weapons or as many weapons, and weapons were handheld. So clenching fists, blood rushing to the fist helps protect the metacarpal bones from injury by reducing the level of strain during striking. So when we become angry, blood tends to rush to our hands. Just to throw out some other quick things real quick, just throwing them on here. The OFC, the amygdala, the hypothalamus, the striaterminalis, the BNST, and the paraqueductal gray are all related to anger and aggression. And neurosurgery parents report feeling angry and behave violently when any of these circuits are stimulated. Some patients with psychomotor epilepsy experience seizures when in which they attack someone without provocation. So the people who have seizures in some of these regions of the brain actually end up acting violently while they're having seizures. They are not in control while they're having that seizure, but they act violently as a result. So it's showing that it's basically those regions of the brain, again with seizures, are just endlessly activating. If it's the region of the brain where aggression occurs, then it can cause them to attack others. Interestingly enough, reactive aggression is associated with reward. So in the brain, it's associated with the positive affect regions of the brain. It's correlated with approach and reward regions of the brain, and the retaliatory aggression is associated with genetic profiles of those who have reward-seeking behaviors. So aggression does activate similar regions of our brain as the reward centers. So it is something that makes us feel good after we do, when it is specifically retaliatory aggression. So if we've been aggressed against and we're retaliating, we feel good after retaliating. So it could be it likely then is that one of the reasons for us being so likely to retaliate when we've been aggressed against is because of these reward systems in the brain, and it's basically our brain is rewarding ourselves for retaliating when we've been wronged. And it makes sense evolutionarily and adaptively for us to retaliate when we've been wronged. Otherwise, people will just keep wronging us. Otherwise, we just keep losing and losing. Looking at development, and how development works with anger. So just, and then age and aggression. So anger starts really young. Again, due to frustration. By 6 months old, infants are showing anger. Actually, 2 months olds can be angered by bodily restraint. So it's, again, that frustration. They don't show necessarily the same facial features of anger, but they have the same brain regions activating as those with anger. Older children then use dominance aggression. They're able to understand others' intentions. They may be angered by being teased and then have retaliatory aggression or having a toy taken away. So this comes back to the transgression aggression hypothesis. Interestingly enough, the most aggressive human beings are toddlers. They resort to physical aggression 25% of the time in daycare setting when frustrated. They can be socialized to reduce aggression, but it's when we're looking at the age at which we the age at which we engage in the most aggression is at toddlers. 2 to 3 years old, we engage in the most aggression. However, most of this aggression is relatively harmless. Permanent harm is rare to come from toddler aggression. However, lethal aggression obviously peaks much later. Typically in the mid to late teens is where lethal aggression peaks. Let's look at that in the next slide. You have young male syndrome, and this is where deaths per million. It's those who are, and you see that offenders over here is slightly younger than victims, but it really peaks right around 18 to 20 that it peaks. It really starts rising at about 10. So adolescence, early adolescence, it really starts going up. And you get that here as well. It starts going up both in offenders and victims, and it tends to peak at around 20 to 24. And this goes back to what we talked about before with the prefrontal cortex and risk-taking and all of that. This leads us to warfare, and the view that aggression is easy but violence is less difficult. There's somewhat controversial research that says that an average, normal, healthy individual will have a hard time or a resistance towards killing a fellow man, and even sometimes at the expense of saving one's own life. There's some evidence for this. So 15 to 25% of Allied soldiers during World War II fired their rifles at the enemy. Only 15 to 25% fired their rifles at the enemy. Most actually were shown to be firing their rifles over the tops. Now there's some argument here that they were just laying down covering fire, but even then you've got really low numbers that were actually shooting at the opponents. At the Battle of Gettysburg, 27,574 of the recovered muskets found that 90% were still loaded or even double or triple loaded. So they were just loading on top of the other one without firing. Now this could be misfires, it could be mistakes in loading due to panicking, but you still have a lot of weapons that weren't fired. And it could have just been that individuals were unwilling to attack, unwilling to kill. It's been found that 1% of World War II fighter pilots were responsible for almost 40% of planes shot down. This could be skill, but it also could be this reluctance to kill. And relating to that is how violence is actually declining. So we see up above is hunter-gatherer societies, and then you've got US and Europe down at the bottom, and these are male deaths. It's not just this. Steven Pinker has a great book, Why Violence Has Declined, Better Angels of Our Nature, Why Violence Has Declined, showing how in every century, in every successive century, there is less and less violence occurring. So each year there's less violence that is occurring as a result. Less people are being killed, less people are being attacked. So society as a whole is becoming less violent. Why do we think it's not becoming less violent? Well, TV, video games, all of this, there's this general belief that there's more violence because we see more violence on TV, when in actuality the amount of violence we have is really, really low now. And just the last thing I'll finish on, does TV cause violence? Does violent video games cause violence? Well, all of the research says yes. However, before you start throwing things at the monitor or your phone or whatever you're watching this on, while the research says yes, the actual answer is, in the long term, no. The effects of violence, especially in video games, the research on this shows that it's very transient. It tends to last less than an hour. Sometimes even less than that, sometimes even less than a half an hour. So the increase in violence that does occur, so people who play a violent video game, their blood pressure's up from playing it. Their levels of their willingness to commit aggression is up, but it goes away, tends to be within an hour of playing the video game. So when people say that all these violent video games are causing more school shootings, stuff like that, no, that's not true. Because unless the person played the violent video game, immediately picked up their gun and went and started shooting up people, then the aggression did not come from the video game. It came from something else. The aggression from the video game was likely gone within 15 to 30 minutes. Okay, a little bit longer than I'd intended for this lecture, but like I said, pretty short. Thanks, come on back.